Just go to shatontv.com/telegraph. What's that?
Oh, I was just saying there's a lot of them.
Oh, just go to Shat.
I was like,
oh fuck, the mic's broken again.
I was just pantomiming. I'm sorry.
Jesus, Roger.
Now I'm the asshole.
Hi, folks. This is Louis Hertham, the original Peter Abernathy. Hell is empty and all the devils are here on the Shat on TV Westworld podcast with Roger, Gene, and Big D.
Welcome back to Shat on TV Westworld, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO series Westworld. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me are my two co-hosts, Ashley Schlafly.
Hi, y'all.
And Roger Roper.
You're a creature of beauty and power.
Thanks, Raj. And this is our Telegraph edition, where we look back on this week's emails and voicemails, following up on our Instacast and deep dive into episode 3 of season 3 of Westworld, The Absence of Field. Raj, Ash, thanks for joining me again after an amazing deep dive that got a lot of positive reviews. As we look to this week's emails and voicemails, Ashley has handpicked all of these. I have confirmed the decisions. Raj is here to expand upon them, so we're very excited to be with you. Again, if you haven't listened to the podcast before, the Telegraph is listener mail and voicemail. It is not necessarily everything we received. We received more than 100 this week, so if you don't hear yours on the podcast, just go to Shat on TV, go to the Westworld section and the Telegraph, and you will see all of these in their entirety. And as a reminder, if you'd like to write into us, you can write in at host@shatontv.com or call us at 914-719-SHAT. Raj, we don't have Big D here to do the Telegraph, so I was wondering if you could do the honors.
I'm going to press the button right now.
All right, so this week's voicemails and emails focus on two primary areas. One is philosophy, and one is technology. Plus, we've got a grab bag of a couple other emails, some actuallys, and some amazing voicemails, including sound effects. So stay tuned for those. The first one comes from Enrique in Brazil, and he says, "Hello, hosts. There are a few very interesting parallels and points that can be made comparing season 1 and what we have already seen of season 3. So let's go back to Julian Jaynes' work, The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. In his work, Jaynes said that after humans became conscious, they felt a hole that before was fulfilled by the God side of the mind. After its disappearance, humanity created religion in order to have that God figure with which to talk and to take orders from. In the series Westworld, after the completion of the maze, Dolores diverged from this idea and started to walk on her own path. Instead of creating a god, she became the god, hence the several references this season where she refers to herself as a new god. Now, going forward, it is interesting to conjecture what exactly is her endgame. We thought she hated all humans and was hellbound on destroying mankind. Instead, in this week's episode, we saw through her conversations with Caleb that she sees in several members of humanity the lack of choice and opportunity she was once given. What is her plan? To destroy Rehoboam? I don't think so. In my opinion, she intends to take control and to inverse, to mirror his actions, to give choice to the many and remove free will from the few, the 1% of the 1%, that caused her so much suffering. Greetings from Brazil, Enrique.
So I think what's really interesting here, Enrique, is that you talk here about Jaynes's work, and I would suggest everybody go out and read this piece. I mean, obviously the showrunners were highly influenced by it, especially in season 1. But I think what you've laid out here is exactly what's happening with Dolores. You know, you talk about how when humans became conscious, that there was a hole that developed that they had to fill with a godlike figure, and when that hole kind of went away, they created a religion. I think that's exactly what Dolores is doing. She became conscious only very recently constantly. And she has filled that hole with a god, which is her, basically. She has become that deity. And now she's creating a religion around that. And I think, though, what's going to be really fascinating this season is that for Dolores, if she's a god, every god requires a certain amount of sacrifice. And that, I think, is going to be the question, is what does she require of her followers to sacrifice, Caleb being the first of those.
Next up, we have an email from a longtime listener and writer-inner, John Lish, who says, "Hi, Rita Sue and Bob too. I've been pondering Ashley's juxtaposition of free will and being sentient for a few days. In particular, the nature of how humans experience the world through the black box that is the brain. The research I've read suggests that our consciousness is only around 10% of what our brain does, and that most of our drivers occur independently of our conscious self. We do have the ability to influence these drives, but it is difficult to shape on an individual level. So we as humans have drives we don't really understand, are capable of augmenting ourselves to fulfill those drives, and here's the kicker. In social organizations and structures, we are much more susceptible to being influenced and going with the crowd. But what of free will? Is it a simplistic idea like the noble savage, which is an artificial construct of political philosophy? It is an ancient idea, perhaps as old as human consciousness itself. Yet is it real? Are humans just delusional creatures who have been deluding themselves since they started worshiping gods who could be pleased or displeased by their actions? Let's be ambitious of our expectations of Westworld. When Dolores declares the new gods are here, isn't that a declaration that humans are capable of free will? This does feel kind of biblical in that Dolores is the serpent offering awareness to humanity. Perhaps that explains the black clothing for Dolores and the white suit for Serac. But everything is perspective, as Satanists will tell you that Satan was the good guy setting humanity free. We just had to give up paradise to do so. Free will wasn't free. There was a price. The great thing about Ashley's proposition is that there's no conclusive answer, which I hope the show expresses. Dolores' apple of knowledge comes with violence and bloodshed, which should please Big D. However, live free and die brutishly is not something that I find attractive. Trade-offs and consequences. Dolores may force humanity to discover their free will, but they probably won't like it. Keep well, Shat family. Your friendly cyborg, John Lish.
So I love this email, John. And for those of you out there that want to hear more about it, this email was about 20 times longer than what Jean just read, and all of it is fantastic. I love the idea of Dolores and this metaphor for being the serpent that is feeding from the tree of knowledge, and that if people eat from it, that they're going to have to sacrifice many things. I mean, we've seen this play out in other sci-fi series. I mean, look at The Matrix with the whole idea of the red pill versus the blue pill, right? Like, you make some sort of sacrifice to see the world as it truly is. And I think it's brilliant. I'd be curious to know what you guys think.
I think everything is the illusion of free will. I think we as Americans especially conscribe to the idea that we have some sort of meritocracy that we live in, but in reality, we're probably closer to the world that the Rehoboam has created. You have to live within these boundaries. And as long as you play by their rules, and as long as you abide by what they tell you to do, and you turn out in the way that you're supposed to, then you can excel. But if you ever try to go against the system, if you ever try to rebel, if you ever try to start a revolution, if you ever try to break down the boundaries that contain us, that world will fight back against you and try to squash you. And listen, the illusion of free will, this idea that you could go on Rico and, create jobs for yourself, but the reality is you'll never get beyond your lot in life, unfortunately, is a lot of the way that us Americans feel. And it sucks.
I just wanted to touch on this idea of the noble savage for people who aren't familiar with this idea. John refers to it as an artificial construct of political philosophy. And the noble savage is basically saying that without society to press on a person, our natural state is to be inherently good. And that guilt over things that we have done as a society may artificially make us believe that people left to their own devices without a society to push on them, people out in the wild, if you will, would have behaved in a noble fashion, which I think most of us understand is probably not entirely accurate.
Yeah, and if you want a classic, example, I mean, Tarzan is a great example of a noble savage, character archetype. If you want to have something kind of, link onto that, he's not been corrupted, and it takes, the people coming in to corrupt him. So I think that's a really interesting point, John, and I think that's a really great explanation, Gene.
Thanks for your email, John. Next up, we have one from Tom from Chicago. And Tom is writing in really interestingly about free will from a theoretical physics perspective. So he writes, folks, it's great to see you examining the concept of free will as it relates to Westworld in the deep dive. While a lot of people see free will as the realm philosophically, which I did, Tom, it is actually also an area of debate in theoretical physics, which is something I'm fascinated by, but not smart enough to truly understand. A little background. There are two main viewpoints in theoretical physics. There's relativity, explaining the universe of really big things, and quantum mechanics, explaining the universe of really small things. Both schools provide insight into free will and have come to different conclusions. And this week, I will cover relativity, as I don't want you folks having to read a really long-ass letter all at once. I'm looking at you, Ashley. Relativity. Under this theory, there is no free will. There is one path that dates back to the start of the universe, the Big Bang, and all supposed choices are fated to happen due to the concept of cause and effect. This approach is called determinism. And the basis for the determinist approach is the concept of a block universe. Under relativity theory, Einstein proved that time and space are inseparable. So, what and how does this relate to free will? The best way to visualize the concept of a block universe is looking at time and space as a loaf of bread. And then he actually included an illustration in a separate document. This is also the same guy that makes the spreadsheets, just for people who don't remember. The length of the bread, if you're looking at a loaf of bread, represents the time, and the slices of the bread represent space, both past, present, and future slices. So if you're looking at a loaf of bread, let's say the past is to the left and the future is to the right of your loaf of bread, right? And the middle, I guess, is now. In this universe, all times coexist. There is no universal present moment. Now, you may ask, how is this possible? And this is proven by the following scenario, which involves calculating the different elements of the equation for speed, the action, not the drug. Now, here's the thing, guys. If this doesn't make sense to you when you listen to the Telegraph, you need to go to chatontv.com, look at the Telegraph, and look at the illustration here that he's provided, because it helps, trust me. But he's saying speed, starting out with the premise that speed equals distance divided by time, which makes sense, right? Miles per hour. So let's make some assumptions. One, the speed of light is constant, okay? It never goes any faster or slower than 186,282 miles per second. Proven scientific fact. Two, Gene and Ashley are X feet apart and both traveling at the speed of light. So two of us were on a tandem bike going at the speed of light. Gene and Ashley at a certain point will be equidistant from Big D. Let's say Big D is apparently the sun in our universe. We are Y feet away from him, right? So we're making a triangle here. And again, this is all in the diagram if you haven't seen it. Now, the calculation is doing is we know the speed of light. We know that Ashley and Gene are equidistant from Big D. So the distance variable of both Gene and Ashley is known, plus or minus Y meters. This distance from Big D plus the speed of light. Therefore, the missing variable is time, which can be calculated by simple algebra and shows that Ashley, Gene, and Big D all exist in different nows or time slices. The macro version of this result could be described as the block universe of actualities, as all actualities have always existed, do exist, and will always exist. Therefore, the notion of free will is just an illusion, but it does seem we have the choices given the complexity of the universe. Next week, I'll look at the other theory that the School of Quantum Mechanics calls indeterminism. Stay safe and all the best, Tom from Chicago. Now, here's the thing. If none of that shit made sense to you, don't feel bad, because it didn't to me. And so what I did is I looked up this idea of the block universe of actualities. And Tom, I wish you would have explained it like this. Roger, Ashley and I are worms in this bread, right? Our little lives exist in the bread. They always have existed, and we're little worms. And so if you slice the bread, our past, our present, and our future are all there. But where we are as worms, our bodies in that bread, they're already determined, right? They're already there in that slice. So where you slice it, you can see where we are at that time, but there's no changing the path of the worm. The worm can't be in multiple places in the loaf of bread, right? So if anybody understands this, please go to shatontv.com, go to the Telegraph, and please say, good job, Tom.
I guess my question is, if I go back in time, if I get in my DeLorean, I go back, or I ride my motorcycle and I sleep with my grandmother, does that bread get toasted in the future?
It's a great grandmother, and you have to give her a pendant to seal the deal.
Right.
That's the way it works.
What I think is really interesting here is this combination of relative physics here and making that kind of speak to the political philosophy we've talked about, because the opposite of hard determinism is humanism. And that is where this push and pull is happening in this series so far, is you've got everything is what it is because we believe that there's no way to change it. And so we're on a loop, whether that loop is created by Dr. Ford or by the choices that Rehoboam is predicting that will be made. And then there's this other side that's saying, okay, there is a potential to have free will because the human element can change things. And I'm going to post on Twitter something I use for my classes, which actually, funny you mentioned libertarianism because it's actually on there, Roger, that actually looks at kind of a spectrum in terms of whether reality is determined or indeterminate, and whether or not there's free will or we don't have free will, and kind of where people fall on that spectrum. But I think this is a brilliant idea. I'm so excited about next week, about your email, and thank you for not making it too long. Although this one was kind of long, I gotta say, it was one short.
Thanks, Tom, for your email. Next up, we have one from a very frequent listener and writer, Chago, who says, the Isaac Asimov short story Reason fits perfectly into the Westworld Imaginarium. To sum it up, QT-1, a robot in charge of controlling a space station which supplies energy via microwave beams to planets, starts reasoning in a very Descartes-like fashion. I myself exist because I think. QT-1 makes the lesser robots of the station disciples of a new religion, which considers the power source of the ship to be master. QT-1 teaches them how to bow down to master, and in tone, there is no master but master, and QT-1 is his prophet. The humans of the station initially attempt to reason with QT-1 until they realize that they can't convince QT-1 otherwise. Their attempts to remove QT-1 physically also fail, as the other robots have become disciples and refuse to obey human orders. The situation seems desperate, as a solar storm is expected, potentially deflecting the energy beam and incinerating populated areas. When the storm hits, the humans are amazed to find that the beam operates perfectly. QT-1, however, does not believe they did anything other than maintain meter readings at optimum according to the commands of the master. The humans thus come to the realization that although the robots themselves were consciously unaware of doing so, they'd been following the first and second laws all along. QT-1 knew on some level that it would be more suited to operating the controls than the humans, so lest it endanger them and break the first law by obeying their orders, it subconsciously orchestrated a scenario where it would be in control of the beam. So in the end, we find ourselves trapped in the conundrum of fearing AI because it is imperfect and fearing AI because it is superior and perfect, and obviously would eliminate our imperfect race. We fear AI because we fear ourselves. We fear the unknown because we assume it would do what we know, corrupt and destroy, even if unwillingly. If hosts existed, we wouldn't be able to look them in the face, not because they'd make us question the nature of our reality, but the nature of our condition as humans being. After that, we'd be left only with ways to prove them wrong, prove them unreal, prove them imperfect, prove them like us. And then we would be able to deal with them the way we deal with ourselves. Cheers, Chago.
For so long as humans, we've been faced with this conundrum of creating robots, of creating software to enhance our lives, to make it easier for us so we can live a better life. What I think we're struggling with as humans as we build new technologies is it's making us redundant, when in all actuality, we should have been fearing nature. When nature fights back, we truly understand what it means to be human. And maybe it's taking a global pandemic to point this out, but all these Isaac Asimov short stories, I'm enthusiastically going to go back and read, because the morals of those stories, I think, ring true as we're facing nature fighting back against our humanity now. And I think that's very interesting.
For those who aren't familiar with the laws that Thiago is referring to, just also as a kind of a pointer, really interesting stuff. Like as we talk about Asimov, there are 3 laws of robotics, and the first being that a robot may not injure a human being, or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. The second is a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. So in essence, you couldn't tell a robot, go kill that guy. That would be really bad, right? So just a little bit of clarity on that. Next up, we have one from Vincent C. It's directly to Ash. It says, "Hi, Ash. So Dolores explained to Caleb about Rehoboam in near identical terms as a mirror of the real world. I guess we don't have to wonder if the show hosts are aware of sentient world simulation. There's a lot online, but in particular, I found a white paper from 2006 called Sentient World Simulation, a concept paper for comments. It's really good despite being rather dated. I would check it out if I were all of you. Serac is doing what the Department of Defense and other U.S. agencies have been doing with sentient world simulation for years now. The predictive capability after running a simulation of a scheme the person or agency wants to pull off will influence if they try it in the real world or run it as a false flag. You can imagine the power and potential control of a society that can be gained from its use. So safe to say, Serac is a bad guy, and Dolores might be on her way to freeing humanity from the cage they are in, not wiping humanity out." And that comes from Vincent C.
So thanks, Vincent, for writing in. Vincent is one of my new YouTube friends. He's been fantastic on YouTube and leaving great discussion. And I've been encouraging multiple YouTube listeners to write in, Vincent being one of them. I actually went and read this paper, and it's pretty scary. I had the only other frame of reference, I guess, that I had for sentient world simulation was when the Edward Snowden news broke, and he talked a lot about what the NSA was doing and connected it to a lot of what is happening here in this paper that it's being discussed about collecting information and how it will be used to create new ideas and new programming and just basically controls on society. And it's very much what we're seeing on the show. And I don't know if that makes Serac a bad guy, but I definitely think it makes him a potentially really nefarious character.
Yeah, and I wish Big D was on this podcast, because he would tell us that the war game simulations that they play is easily breakable. All these simulations are based on controllables. And as soon as you put in one of those divergences, all of their games go to hell. There was a general that was on. He was actually well known in the early 2000s as the guy that beat all the war game simulations when the U.S. was planning to invade Iraq and planning to invade Afghanistan. Basically, he was just like, well, what if I just did this? That like common sense would tell you to do. And they were like, no, you can't do that. And he's like, why? Because if I do it, I'll beat you. And I think that's what AI struggles with, is the human factor. Humans, just like nature, you can't predict. And that unpredictability is our humanity. And that's the way that we can beat these systems.
Raj, speaking of which, we got an interesting email from Anne, the nurse practitioner. And Anne says, "I've worked in healthcare for almost 30 years. I was a trauma RN for a long time, and now am a nurse practitioner and a college professor. I agree, healthcare providers are getting smarter and smarter. We have an abundance of research-based evidence to use when we care for patients, and all healthcare professionals are required to keep their knowledge base current in order to provide the most safe and comprehensive care. However, I could totally see a situation similar to the ambulance scene happening out in the field or in a facility. Because there is so much information about health and healthcare available, many healthcare professionals rely on clinical decision trees to guide treatment. A 2004 article regarding a primary care physician estimated it would take 30 years to summarize all the current controlled trials. Clearly, this is impossible, so clinical decision support systems, also known as CDS, were created. CDSs utilize the immense amount of clinical literature, evidence-based research, and current guidelines to create clinical decision trees that can help a practitioner make good decisions about patient care. The use of clinical decision trees, called clinical decision support, is fairly widespread and embedded into electronic health records, but most do allow for clinicians to use their best judgment. However, I can see a situation where an insurance company would require the use of CDS or deny payment. That is sort of what happens when you call your insurance company for an authorization for a procedure or to see a specialist. Great show, your faithful listener, and the NP.
And first of all, thank you so much for providing citations and parenthetical citations throughout. I messaged everybody. I was so excited to receive an email like that. So thanks. I think what you say here is very, very interesting. Talking about those clinical decision support systems, I have a chronic illness that I've had since I was 14. And I can't tell you how many times I've had to fight with my insurance company because they claim that certain procedures or medicinal increases are elective. And when I'm feeling horrible, but my levels fall within a quote unquote normal range. But for me, I'm still having all of these symptoms. I mean, it's the reason why I actually lost multiple pregnancies because our insurance would not change, my treatment specifically quick enough. And so I think you bring up a lot of good points here. And I think we're seeing that in the show that, whether our technology increases or not, I think that the health insurance companies are really messed up. And I think that just adding the tech and removing the human element will only empower them kind of more than they already are.
Thanks, Anne, for your email. Next up, we have one from Brendan Costello, and he says, hi, folks. Serac is described as being like a black hole, an entity or phenomenon for which they had no direct evidence, but they could only detect because of the absence of anything in the space and the effect on the surrounding area. From the Strand poem, wherever I am what is missing. I'm not wholly convinced that Serac is the virtual manifestation of Rehoboam on earth, or Rehoboam's only begotten son. But here's something that I don't believe you've addressed. Every episode this season starts with Rehoboam's predictive ring graphic. These show anomalies indicate the actions of the characters, mainly the host's actions in the real world and the events of each episode, deviations from Rehoboam's plan for the world. These host actions are getting the machine's attention, but they seem relatively small in the grand circle of life that is Rehoboam's graph. I suspect this is because these hosts are entities that were not in the plan and did not have any course laid out for them. How will Rehoboam react when it detects Caleb's deviation from predestination or the prediction it has created for him? More importantly, though, it strikes me that having this graphical representation is more than posting the date and location of the action. It's like we're seeing the story framed by Rehoboam's perspective. Of course, in the action of the story, we see things that the supercomputer God mind does not, or at least that it hasn't become aware of yet. On the one hand, I want to believe that Dolores is going to overcome Rehoboam and Insight, and theoretically take them down, along with Delos. But does the ring graphic at the beginning of each episode imply that the Godmind supercomputer survives? Or does Dolores take down Delos by taking over Insight and Rehoboam? Thanks for your work. Greatly appreciated in these crazy times. Brendan Costello in Upper Lockdown, New York City.
So this is another YouTuber. So thank you so much for writing in. We really appreciate it. You have something here. I mean, your entire email is great, but the one thing that really stuck out to me is I had not considered the fact that perhaps the ring graphs, the Rehoboam, graphics that they're being showed at the beginning, that could imply that somehow this is a foregone conclusion that they're going to be successful, because why would we still be seeing all these deviations and these multiple potentially multiple timelines that Big D kind of outlined last week in the deep dive. And I think that really gave me a lot to think about, Brendan. I really appreciate that. And please stay safe in New York City. Things are crazy there right now.
I think time is a flat circle, and it doesn't matter where all these divergences are happening. And I think that maybe bring back some of the physics email that we had previously.
Now that we've covered philosophy and technology, we've got a couple other emails that didn't really fit into any category. And the first one comes from Christian from Dallas. And Christian writes in, "Hello, I just pulled up the third episode on HBO and read the description for the second time. Only this time, the description meant something to me, having watched the episode already. It says, if you don't like what you see in the mirror, don't blame the mirror. Dolores clearly was not happy with Charlotte's bodyjacker after the scene she caused in the bar, and her general need to be parented was not convenient for Dolores. I think the showrunners feel that the answer as to who is in Hale's body has already been given to us, hence the description of the episode. Dolores can't be mad at Charlotte's bodyjacker because it's just a reflection of Dolores, aka it is Dolores/Wyatt, or a copy of her. This makes perfect sense and would mean that the theme moving forward will be about the same personality in two different roles. There will likely be a conflict between Dolores and Charlotte, where they will be in disagreement about something and be the physical embodiment of the internal struggle we humans experience when we have conflicting opinions on a personal level. In fact, that is what makes us human, right? There can be one person in a room with three different opinions. A conflict of opinion between the two entities of the same mind may be what actually makes Dolores truly sentient or human-like. Anyway, I love the podcast, and I'm happy to have Ashley around to keep you boys in check. Also, since this is my first write-in after 2 years of listening, I'd like to add that Gene still gives me the biggest brain boner. No offense, Ashley. I just don't swing that way. Much love, Christian from Dallas, Texas.
I think Christian just described the format for this podcast. 3 different opinions can still coexist in one podcast, and that's what makes it human. That's what brings people together, is the fact that there's a divergence of different opinions, even though we're watching the same thing and we're talking about it. That's what makes the podcast fun.
On the topic of free will, I just want to point out that there is one listener out there, Christian, who favors me over other hosts. And I really, really appreciate it, Christian. That's just the ego boost I needed to keep me going for the rest of the season. So thanks a lot for writing in.
First of all, no offense taken. I get it. But I would just like to say that I was not really sold on the Dolores Wyatt kind of theory that's floating out there. I really, really like the fact that you bring in that description, because we've talked over and over again ad nauseum that nothing is lacking intentionality from the showrunners. And so I actually went back and looked at this description that you mentioned, and I'm thinking you really may be onto something there. Still don't get how it happened. I still don't get how she would, suss out the Wyatt personality versus the Dolores personality, but I really like this, Christian. And I'm telling you, the emails coming in from Texas this season, I'm feeling pretty proud. So thanks so much for this, because it really helped me kind of connect that.
Yeah, I feel like there's a divergence being noted out there in Texas, all the minds coming together and producing some incredible content. Next up, we have one coming in from Danny H., who says, "Hello, Shat hosts. I love Shat the movies, and that brought me to Shat on TV, especially since I love Watchmen and Westworld. I'm not sure if y'all have brought this up before, but I've noticed that there's an absence of government. In the first 2 seasons, restricted to Westworld and not the outside world, all intervention and oversight, whether QA or security, is done in-house. Now in season 3, if LA really is the real world, we see virtually no government. There's not a single character that is representative of government. The only thing that comes close is some of the police vehicles. Yet aside from the obvious imposters who attempt to kill Dolores, these may not be representative of government either. It seems that everything is run by corporations. All the power structures represented are corporations and the people who control them. While many themes have been presented thus far, are the showrunners also showing us a future where corporations being in control is no longer in the shadows, so to speak? Are they positing that governments are obsolete, or just completely irrelevant. We certainly seem to be there now, and another show that goes in that direction, Mr. Robot, addresses this directly. Thoughts? Thanks so much for your podcast. Peace, Danny H.
I don't think that they're positing that governments are obsolete. I just think that 50 years in the future, if we keep on this trajectory that we're going, these multinational corporations will be above the government. They will have purchased the governments. They will be one of the same, and that they will write the laws and enact the laws, and they will operate based on the power that they wield. And that's why shows like Mr. Robot and Westworld have hit a nerve with so many people, is that they're seeing this play out in the future. And there's other shows that address this as well. But yeah, when multinational corporations wield this much power and they become the government, this is the future.
Well, I think it goes beyond the corporations. It goes into like the branding that we see. You know, I mentioned jokingly when the writer last week asked about my dissertation, I talked about my thesis about how corporations would create a new body politic. That's exactly what I was talking about, is that no longer will we identify as subjects of like America versus Mexico versus France, but we'll identify as Apple users and Android users. And that eventually will extend out beyond that to control all different aspects of our lives. And I think that you've really hit on that here, Danny. And I think, you know, we've seen, like you said, a couple of the police cars and the interactions with the cops that were dirty, you know, this week that had taken the Rico job. But I think it's very interesting that we're not seeing any sort of government entity that's providing oversight of this AI, because this corporation inside a corporation like Delos, have they become the, you know, not just the figureheads, but the heads of state now that are controlling things.
Here's the good news for those that are shocked by this and scared by this, is that this has been tried before throughout history, especially in the 1900s, and it failed. You just have to look no further than the East India Trading Company to see how multinational corporations that tried to act as governments inevitably failed.
Subscribe to our Taboo podcast, everybody. It's just go to Shat on TV, go to Taboo. If you haven't watched Taboo, I read an entire book. It was like 500 pages about the East India Trading Company that really did not come in handy at all during the entire coverage of Taboo. So check it out.
Was it the company? Which one was it?
The Honorable Company, yes.
The Honorable Company. Highly recommended. If you have not read The Honorable Company, fucking read it. It's fucking great.
The show does not honor it at all. No. Moving on to the actuallys, here are some corrections that you have for us. And if you have a correction, just write into host@shatontv.com or call in 914-719-SHAT or tweet at us, but include actually, so we know that it's an actually. The first one comes from Talia in Katy, Texas, another Texan, who says, longtime listener, I'm writing in response to something Big D said during the Telegraph. When posed with the question of whether Charlotte was a new host or someone from a previous season, he said that Dolores wouldn't be able to create a new host because she wouldn't have the knowledge to do so. Actually, he forgets that Ford and Dolores created Bernard, and Ford himself says he couldn't have done it without her. She was a crucial part in making Bernard.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've got a really good point here. I do think, though, that, you know, we are not quite sure still about the specifics about how Dolores has recreated Bernard this season. I think we were a lot more sure of what that looked like at the end of season 2. But I think the correction is valid for sure. I'm sorry that Big D is not here, you know, to respond to it.
I'm glad he's not here to respond to it. I think we should kick him while he's down. You know, he's sitting there taking care of his wife, bailing on the podcast. Fuck Big D.
I just want to point out, this is the second week we got a Big D. Actually, I am loving that. Keep them coming in. It makes us know that he is not perfect, because people, I mean, I feel like they're putting like halos, like they're literally are like the angel with halos emojis on YouTube talking about Big D. I think we need more of these actuallys to bring him back down to reality here. Equalizer.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop there. We've got one from John G., also directed at Big D. He says, hey, Dick. I guess I just don't understand. When season 3 started, I'd never in my life heard the word Rehoboam. It's an old biblical name, so it's kind of weird in your mouth. But after a few minutes of figuring out, it's easy to say. I can do it. Why do you have to shorten it? We're in season 3 now, and you've had 3 podcasts a week since the first episode. How could it still be so hard to say? I honestly don't get it. And that comes from John G.
Yeah, I posted a meme on this. By the way, did we ever figure out what's going on with our Shat on TV Twitter? Why it was restricted?
Yeah, I tried to log into it.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah, so I posted a meme on Twitter recently about it was the meme of fans of Friends will understand it. It's Phoebe trying to explain to Joey how to say something, and it was my take on us trying to teach Big D how to say Rehoboam. You try telling a 6'7", 300-pound former Army airborne how to say something. He's like Andre the Giant. His hands will fit over all of our faces. I'm not going to tell Big D how to pronounce something. Are you kidding me? It's in our Twitch rules.
Here's the deal, guys. Akichita, we never got there with that last season. So I think we just need to let it go. We got hashtag Rehobo. I'm excited about it. Just let it go.
I think John G's overlooking a huge advantage of Rehobo, which is it's 1 syllable shorter. So if you add that up over an entire season, we're saving like an hour of podcast so that we could talk about other topics. Big D's doing us a favor.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for our emails, everybody. We're moving on to voicemail. Again, if you want to send us a voicemail, go to 914-719-CHAT. And this next voicemail is a terrific example of why you should send in voicemail, because you can make sounds, and sounds are exciting. This one comes from Regal.
Hey, guys, this is Regal Standard. I just wanted to call and say, can you tell me one moment during the fucking show on this last Sunday where they didn't have some goddamn music? Some fucking monkey turning knobs, freaking pad sounds. Every fucking time. And it was really loud. And that really, really bugged me. Love your show. I think it's fantastic. I love the ideas of Westworld. But the show leaves something to be desired, honestly. The actual watching show. But I love all the ideas of the show. And I especially love you guys. So, cheers to you. Love you. Keep doing what you're doing. I listen to everything. You guys are the best. Peace. See ya.
Gene, you're a fan of the Nolans, the Nolan brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Inception is, I think, quite possibly your favorite movie of all time.
It is my favorite movie of all time.
The big part of that movie is the music. Bon,
the Inception horn.
Bon. Yeah, it's the Inception horn. Do you think that Jonah Nolan just stole something from his brother here?
Here's the thing, Raj, is we just finished Watchmen, covering the Watchmen on HBO. And Watchmen had an incredible soundtrack. Westworld has been hit and miss, I'll be honest. So the episode where they had Radiohead, motion picture soundtrack on, I was in tears. It was such a beautiful use of music. But I will admit that Regal Standard is right. And I didn't think about it at the time, but when they drop like reveals, like Maeve's in a simulation, it's like, and also, on this episode, it, as Regal said, it did kind of at times sound like a monkey turning knobs. Thanks, Regal Standard, real name. Next up, we have one from Kyle, and this one's a little bit of help for Big D on how to pronounce Rehoboam.
Hey guys, this is Kyle calling regarding Westworld podcast. I wanted to give you a little insight into pronunciation because I was raised super Christian-y. So in my growing up in church, we referred to Rehoboam and Jeroboam. And that's how I remember saying it. Rehoboam, Jeroboam. Now granted, this was like I said, super Bible Christian church in the Midwest. So we may have been saying it wrong, but that's how we did it. And those are easier for me to say than whatever you guys are trying to do. Rehoboam, Jeroboam. Thank you.
I've never been to Bible school, but I think you're right, Kyle, because Rehoboam doesn't have hobo in it. And also just my Middle Eastern roots, like some DNA inside of me is telling me that Rehoboam sounds better. But it loses that Rehobo factor, which I think, again, Big D's not here to defend it, but also like the t-shirts would go out the window. It would cause us a lot of merchandise money.
The fact that we have commissioned individuals to draw us a hobo that's a robot on like holding a stick with a bindle at the end and making that our t-shirt, like Rehobo is our get rich quick scheme.
I mean, I actually had called my grandmother when we first started this because I was raised in a fairly religious family, as I've said before. And she actually pronounces it the same way as this caller said, but I just kind of blew that off and was like, well, that just doesn't sound the same. And I went online and I looked, and there's multiple videos about how to pronounce it. And what's real fun is that they're all incredibly different. So I'm not quite sure which, where there's one that's actually Rehoboam, which doesn't sound right to me at all. So I think the mystery is still out there on how to pronounce it. I like Rehobo. I think it's the best. So I think that's what we should go with.
Thanks for your voicemail, Kyle. Next up, we have one from Tom W., a longtime listener from North Carolina, who's writing in about Serac.
Hey, this is Tom W. from North Carolina. Again, I want to say thank you to you guys. I love the new lineup. I love the group you've got together. Welcome, Ashley. It's good to hear a different voice for multiple reasons. But wanted to throw one thing out there. I think it's slapping us in the face that Serac is a avatar or a digital version of Rehoboam. Thanks, Dick. But the reason I say that, if we go all the way back to season 1 with Bernard and Ford said he could only get so far with human help, but you get a lot farther with a computer helping him or an android or an AI helping him. So if Liam's father was the creator, wouldn't it make sense that Liam actually partnered with an AI to create Rehoboam? Maybe a human actually helped him create Solomon, and then Solomon became the AI to help create Rehoboam, and that may be going way down in the rabbit hole. But just wanted to throw that out there. I think that we have to look back. I think everything ties together. And the fact that Ford mentioned that he could only get so far with humanity and had to use AI to get to the next step, wouldn't it make sense that they would have to do that for the Rehoboam itself? I think Serac may have at one point been a real person, but I think now is completely virtual, kind of like a Ben Arnold. Want to love to hear your guys' thoughts. Have a great day.
I think that you've got a lot of really great stuff here. I think that the whole idea of, we're Ford, I had actually forgotten that he said that, he could only get so far with humanity and that he had to use AI to kind of close the gap. And I think it would make perfect sense with the same thing with Insight. I mean, you've got basically these two incredibly brilliant men that are trying to make these technological advancements. And there's only so much that the human mind can process, and there's only so much time in which the human mind can process. It's going to be slower than an AI. And so I like that. I'm still holding out hope that Serac is a real person and we're not seeing like this mirror reflective image where it's literal, where you have Ford and Bernard and then you're going to have, Liam and Serac. Like, I hope it isn't a direct reflection, but I think this is great, Tom. I really do.
One of the ideas I really like here that Tom presented, as you kind of highlighted, Ashley, was this idea of the AI lending a hand. And I know we've referred to it several times during this podcast, but Josh Clark's and the World podcast, when it talks about artificial intelligence, one of the ideas is that in order to build a better AI, you use an AI to build that AI. And it would be a really interesting idea if, all Serac aside, if Solomon decided that it wanted to create a better version of itself and it decided to create Rehoboam, right? We keep believing that the idea here is that humans said, hey, we had Solomon, we need to create something better. What if Solomon itself was like, hey, I want to create something better, and created, what would it name its own son? Well, it would name it Rehoboam, because that would make sense, right? What is Solomon's son? So really interesting idea here. And I do hope that some point in this season, we get an answer as to the origins of Rehoboam, as well as the nature of Serac. So thanks for calling in, Tom. And finally, we have a voicemail from Ryan, who points out that being a caller is kind of tough.
Hey guys, Ryan here calling. I was calling for Westworld. I'd just like to say this is like take two. I called it earlier. Said a couple of things and hung up because it was instantly really hard realizing that what you're saying is being listened to and recorded. So I got to give you guys much kudos. Never wrote a bad email about you guys. Always reacted on Twitter in a positive manner, I'd hope to think. Big fan of Carrie. Big fan of Ashley now. Roger, you're missing out on this Westworld thing. But to get into this week's episode, the deep dive, Big D was going on this whole tinfoil theory idea. And I don't think it's so tinfoil at all. To build into that, I believe that personally Maeve is still in the Rehoboam robo simulation. I think she hasn't actually got out of that. Meeting Serac was also part of that simulation. That's why I think he still had control over her. I don't think she actually has a body yet. I think that this whole thing is him trying to find out if he could trust her before he gives her a body to put her into the world to do his biddings. I think he stopped her as a program, and he was also a program stopping that program. Honestly, it's very hard to put thoughts together in a quick phone call, talking to you guys on a voicemail with no responses. So I'll give kudos to all the previous callers, because right now, being in the hot seat, it's pretty hard not to say and try to get your words out. I think she is still in the simulation, and what you guys went on later on saying that it's going to turn out that Maeve is working for Rehoboam, Robo is going to be the turn that she's the bad guy and would be all of her. And I love that idea. I think you guys were spot on for that. I thought that myself too. So I'm just looking forward to seeing how Aaron Paul works into this, how we figure out who the other hosts are, the other balls, who's in Charlotte, who's in the duplicate patch man, evil guy, Liam's bodyguard. I'm saying now, and I'm at a point where I'm just going to say thank you guys for everything everybody in the Shadow universe has done. Movies, TV shows, Game of Thrones, Westworld is what I've watched. But just thank you guys in general. Everybody else, wash your hands and stay safe. Thanks a lot. Bye.
So I have to say that I can completely relate. You know, I used to call in to you guys and leave voicemails. And the first time I ever did, I got cut off because if you haven't realized yet, I'm kind of verbose. I kind of talk a lot. And so I got cut off, and I got cut off twice. And finally on the third try, I was able to trim myself enough to, to make it on there. And I totally get it, Ryan. It's much easier to do what we're doing right now because we can see each other and we're interacting with each other. So you did a great job. And I think you've got some great ideas here. I do think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with Serac and what happens with Rehoboam, and especially, again, how Aaron Paul continues to work into it.
I think what we're learning is that as much as you can rely on technology for conveniences in your life, that need or desire for human interaction, especially when that's taken away from all of us in a global pandemic that we're all experiencing now, that for those of us who may not have a lot of friends or may not have a lot of family, the fact that you can turn to a little independent podcast like us and create those connections is incredible. And I can say it's not just a one-way street. We need this for us. If I didn't have Gene, if I didn't have Ashley, if I didn't have Big D in my life to sit and spend the hours that we do together, even if it's virtual in my life, I would be going stir crazy. And the fact that we can reach out and make the world a little bit smaller is incredibly important in a time like this. So Ryan, thank you for the email. It really means a lot to us. Thank you so much for getting outside of your comfort zone and calling in. And it means the world to us that we're all kind of being able to have this shared experience together.
So we recently started a Twitch channel. as we're playing these video games, Ash would like get on. She's like, I'm going to play Crash Bandicoot with, my son. And lo and behold, Raj and I jump on there, and then we're chatting with, the members. We realize that there's people like Bandaseat down in Perth, Australia. There's people, in Tennessee, in Georgia, in Alabama, who are also in the same predicament we're in, where we're all in our homes and we're just, kind of missing that connection, and just having these conversations, finding out what people like to eat, what they miss about normal life, what they're reading right now. It's really fascinating stuff. Finding out that nobody plays Crash Bandicoot anymore is really exciting. And finding out that Raj is astonishingly good at Division 2. These are all like byproducts, but this is kind of the new normal, at least for the time being. And it's really fascinating to see everybody adjust to it. And also, as the backdrop for that is Westworld. When this stuff was filmed, we didn't have this reality, right? And so it really brings a lot of these things to the foreground, like these questions of like, how dependent on the technology should we get? How much do we need that human interaction? How much can we be controlled? And there is a struggle. If you don't believe it, check your beliefs, because there is a struggle right now of people, deciding what the breaking point is, right? Or when they will believe that they need to stay in their homes. Some people believe it, some people don't. So I appreciate your sign off there as well, Ryan, and saying that people need to wash their fucking hands and stay the fuck at home. Well, that concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Westworld. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcast. The website is shatontv.com. Our email address is host@shatontv.com. That's where you can write in for the Telegraph or just to share your ideas. Again, if you do write in and you don't want it to be shared on the podcast, that's okay. Just put it in your notes and say, hey, this is just for you guys. Don't share it with anybody, and we will honor that request. Also, if you haven't checked out our other podcast, go to shatthemovies.com. That's where we do 80s and 90s movies, and we are rolling those out at the same time. So you can actually get 4 episodes a week of Shat goodness. So go check that out at shatthemovies.com. Wherever fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, please leave a review. That helps the podcast grow. Also, if you'd like to support the podcast, you can go to shatontv.com/support, and you can see all the different ways that Big D has outlined for you to support us. You can also go to shatontv.com/shop to see all of our merch. We've got stickers, t-shirts, mugs, and all sorts of stuff. I know people are stuck at home, and sometimes a little retail therapy helps out a lot. So go check that out. On behalf of my co-hosts, Roger Roper, Ashley Schlafly, Big D, Dick Ebert, and the King Bee, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us on Sunday night, and be sure to join Roger Roper on our Twitch channel. That is shatontv.com/Twitch. He'll be taking your questions and interacting with you live immediately after the episode airs on Sunday night. So that's 7 o'clock Pacific and 10 p.m. Eastern. So check him out there. We had a great group last week, and we hope to have an even bigger group this week. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And as always, stay the fuck at home.